much. My name is Sonia Smith, and I have a question for the panel. So clearly there's a role for government in ensuring a secure food future. And I think we all realise that food and water security will be the big issues in this century. It's been recognised by the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization. It's been recognised by the World Water Council, and we recognise it here. So let's be specific. The best way to secure our food and water resources is to stop ripping up our orchards and farms due to cheap imports. The VFF proposed and it was approved a resolution that imports should comply with the same standards that Australian producers have to comply with: food, animal welfare, safety, occupational, OHS and so forth. Do you believe that there should be a legislative change to put that resolution into Australian law?
I'll start with you, Graham, I guess. The VFF mentioned there.
Sounds like a question for me. The import rules means that, well, the way it works is effectively as imports of food come across our boundaries, there's a testing regime, and obviously not every piece of fruit or every bag of flour is tested, but effectively it's tested for things like chemical residues. So it's very much an outcome-focused regime, whereas internally, domestically, it's a process-driven regulatory regime. So farmers are required to meet a process. So it doesn't matter what the process is in our importing countries, or how cheap that process might be, or how much cost reduction is in there, as long as they can meet the outcomes, the food's allowed in. The process-driven approach in Australia, domestically, and I'm not suggesting that that's a wrong approach, but the process-driven approach we have actually does add cost into the business. There is administrative burden, there's production burdens or production costs that are included just simply because we have that process-driven approach. So, but the real challenge is, well, how do we actually drive a process-driven approach into another sovereign nation? If the outcome is actually meeting the standards we require, what grounds have we got to say that, for example, China should be paying the same wage rates for food production as we pay in Australia? So it's obviously a very tricky question, and being a largely export-orientated country, even our food production, 60 to 80% of our food production in any one year is exported. Be very cautious about how we apply those rules, because we get potential retaliatory action if it looks like we're using some mechanism to prevent as a trade barrier.
So, Ron, is there anything legislatively, it sounds like it's more of an international, national matter rather than something that could be done on a local level?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be seen to be passing the buck, but it is at the Commonwealth Government, is my understanding, where these regulations exist. And certainly the national standards, testing standards that Graham alluded to is certainly managed by the Commonwealth. Some of our labs do play a role in some of those some of that testing, but it's part of a national program that we contribute to per se.
Thank you.
Well, I guess it's like any career. People are looking to the future about the economic benefit of entering a career. While there's certainly an issue around interest in younger people in pursuing a career in agriculture, I think it's a really complex area about why that may be the case. But it doesn't mean there's not some fantastic stories out there. And we have our young agribusiness professionals, as you referred to, who are part of the VFF, who are generally people who are either involved in farm production or actually quite a few young scientists working in places like Deakin, working in the agribusiness sector, so for rural banks or companies like Elders or Ruralco in the supply chain. There is some really good, exciting stories of people involved in agriculture. It's probably just not quite enough. We'd like to see more. But I guess the attitude to life and the expectations about quality of life, and if you're living in Sea Lake, for example, or in the far northern Mallee, it's hard to have the same quality or access to the same quality of services you can have in close to an urban environment. So there's a push about how do we actually provide the quality of life to people in rural areas, so the facilities and amenities that become sort of an expectation. So it becomes more attractive actually to stay in rural areas, because I think this is not just a farming issue, it's actually a regional development issue that we have to address. But there's certainly plenty of people out there who believe there is a bright future in agriculture and doing some fantastic things in it.
Felicity, the Food Alliance, I guess if you've got a lot of young people... Sorry, Ron, go ahead.
Maureen, could I add to that? My understanding is enrolments, tertiary enrolments this year in the agriculture space have actually spiked up. So I think part of the messages is getting out there. Without a doubt, there is a national skills gap across Australia. We're not producing enough graduates to fill the jobs in agriculture or in food that currently exist. But my understanding, talking to Melbourne University, La Trobe University, Charles Sturt University, all of those universities have had a spike in first-year enrolments this year in agriculture courses, which is a good sign.
It is good. And Felicity, just a comment from you, I guess, about the level of interest across the Food Alliance from young people.
So, not addressing the question exactly, but what I was just thinking while both Graham and Ron were talking is something that we can do is get, especially young people, but all of us, understanding where our food does come from, because we've been raised and over the last decade or so, and even a few decades, we don't appreciate all the hard work and how our food is grown and all the work that farmers do. So I think we can do a lot through, say, even community gardens, growing, preparing food together, to get people to understand what's involved and where does the food come from, so that we do appreciate what farmers go through. We do appreciate all the skills, all the technology, all the knowledge that farmers have, and we do appreciate the plight. So, for example, that we're willing to pay a fair price, even though we might have these imports coming in and they might be cheaper, that we can say, no, we value having a farmer locally producing that food locally, maybe producing that food with better standards. Maybe there's less environmental cost in doing so. So I think that's another area that we can support farming and even support farmers and people coming to the profession.
Yes, go ahead, Graham.
So just to add something to that, so one of the things we found is careers officers in secondary schools are actively dissuading students from pursuing careers in agriculture. So we need to turn that around, and this is that, I think as Chris is saying, so that whole, Kathy, the whole perception thing around agriculture. Some of the things, and thanks to our Victorian Minister for Agriculture and Food Security, the VFF has been funded for a Careers Advisors Officer inside the VFF. So we'll be starting recruiting for that position very soon, and their task will be actually to contact those Careers Advisors Officers and work at that level to try and promote a career in agriculture, so that those Careers Advisors, when talking to their students, actually aren't actively dissuading them from pursuing their careers.
And their image is not just farmer wants a wife on television.
One last thing. In the US, the USDA, the US Department of Agriculture, has funded for several years now the Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food. And so that's had a powerful and influential impact on children, especially understanding where their food comes from. So a program like that where especially school kids, link up with a farmer. And that could be multiple different, the outcomes could be multiple, from whether the children go and visit where the farmer comes from, whether the farmer actually delivers, some food to the schools, to all kinds of different activities.
I probably think there probably is merit in definitely looking into that, and we have seen in other parts of the world where their consumption, I guess, of unhealthy food is probably maybe more reasonable. Tax has been used as an example of how they've addressed that. But I also think the other flip side of that, though, is if unhealthy foods are still available and are still as prevalent in our retail mix and neighbourhood centres and town centres and things like that, I still think that there may be those issues of trying to make the healthy and more nutritious option as inviting. So a lot of, I guess, the other part of that argument, I would say then also is looking at the role that planning and planning law and strategies and things like that might be able to look at in terms of limiting where we have unhealthy foods being sold, and looking at where healthier foods perhaps are located, and making sure that we can provide better access, I guess, to healthier and nutritious foods. Kathy?
Generally, what we want to do and what a tax would do would be to provide a more supportive environment or atmosphere in which people could make a healthy and sustainable choice the easier choice. We don't want it all down to, educating individuals. We want you to do this, because the environment that we live in is so full of marketing, is so full of temptations of quite unhealthy food. And so to put it back onto the individual to say, we want you, and we know again and again, diets don't work. So things like regulatory and kind of policy reform that can make it easier, we would be all for, in the mix of creating a more healthier environment. So exactly the detail of a tax, we need the evidence behind that before we were to put something like that into practice, because in some cases it might adversely affect the disadvantaged, the lower income people, because if they're purchasing a lot of unhealthy food, and in fact you're taxing it at quite a high rate, they might feel the burden unproportionally. So we just need to look at things like that before doing something like that. So some of these countries that have done, we need to make sure that they're properly evaluated when they do something like that.
Yes, thanks for the question. It's not an easy answer. It's probably the correct answer. There are some fantastic examples where there has been good cross-department issues dealt with, and in the health area, I know it's not being dealt with at the moment, is Southwest Health Farmer Health Program. It's led by Sue Brundley out of Hamilton. Fantastic program addressing this issue of farmer health. And at the moment, that was currently sitting in our department, or Department of Primary Industries, up until recently. But essentially, it was a health issue, and our minister and department officers put a lot of effort in essentially trying to get the Department of Health to co-fund and fund the program, and both at state level and at Commonwealth level, and without success at the moment. So these issues are there. Departments have their priorities. They have a well thought through process on determining what those priorities are. Sometimes they align, in which case we do get fantastic cross department synergies. In other issues, they either don't align because of timing issues or because there are other priorities. So it's like any issue that cuts across portfolios, either in private business or in government. It is an issue, and we just got to work on it. I don't have a magic answer. There are departmental committees set up, particularly to discuss these types of issues, and that's at a senior level, both at secretary level, head of department level, and also at the DepSec level as well. A lot of that focus is on emergency preparedness and getting ready for floods or bushfires and those sorts of life-threatening activities. But issues such as cross-departmental programs do get discussed and raised there.
Thank you. Lisa?
Just maybe perhaps add to that is at the moment the opportunity, I think, of the Melbourne Metropolitan Planning Strategy is one where food can be introduced to that, and that is obviously a document the Department of Planning is responsible for, but has an impact on food production in terms of protecting agricultural areas, but also access to food through the hierarchy of retail centres and the kind of provision that we have through our retail centres. So that's an example, I guess, of a high-level strategic document that could actually have buy-in from different departments, and it's obviously under consideration at the moment, and hopefully we'll hear or see the next version of it in the next couple of months and see whether comments that the Heart Foundation made, Food Alliance and other agencies about the importance of food in that document, whether that's actually come through.